Vortex Spring is a crystal-clear paradise that hides a jagged limestone throat. In 2010, a man entered its most restricted cavern and simply ceased to exist. This is the impossible disappearance of Ben McDaniel. During the sweltering Florida summer of 2010, these deceptively calm waters became the site of an underwater locked room mystery. A seasoned diver descended into a restricted, dead-end cavern, leaving his backup air tanks at the gate. He never returned, sparking a search that would defy the laws of physics. 30-year-old Ben McDaniel was a man running from ghosts. After a grueling string of personal tragedies, a failed business, mounting debt, and the devastating loss of his younger brother, Paul, Ben sought refuge at his parents' Florida beach house. He found a temporary peace beneath the waves, where the weight of his reality couldn't reach him. But the depths of Vortex Spring held their own darkness. On August 18th, as the sun dipped below the tree line, Ben strapped on his gear and slipped into the water. He was heading for a cave system, so dangerous, its entrance was sealed with a locked iron grate. Although he wasn't certified for cave diving, he somehow convinced the shop staff to unlock that gate for him. He descended into the gloom, leaving his tanks behind, and vanished into a limestone tube that was a complete dead end. When expert recovery teams later spent weeks scouring every inch of that cave, they were met with a chilling physical impossibility. Ben was nowhere to be found. It was as if the rock itself had swallowed him whole, leaving behind only questions that no one could answer. What you are about to hear is not just another missing person case. It is a locked room mystery submerged under millions of gallons of water, a puzzle so baffling it has torn a family apart and pushed world-class recovery divers to the brink of their sanity. Over the next few minutes, we are going to go deep into the claustrophobic depths of Vortex Spring. We will examine the timeline of Ben McDaniel's final days, the bizarre S left at the cave entrance, and the unsettled psychological state of a man who had already lost almost everything. We have to confront the physical impossibility of a 6-foot-tall man evaporating inside a solid rock tunnel. Did Ben accidentally drown in the dark? Or did he stage an elaborate disappearance to escape a life that was crumbling around him? There is even the terrifying possibility of something far more sinister occurring above the surface. By the end of this journey, you will see the evidence for yourself and have to decide what truly happened in that abyss. To understand the horror of this mystery, you have to understand the environment of Vortex Spring. From the surface, it looks like a picturesque swimming hole, a clear basin where thousands of tourists flock to escape the heat. But 58 feet down, that welcoming blue water funnels into a jagged limestone maw. This is the cave entrance. Here, the sunlight is swallowed by the rock and the temperature drops. To go further, a diver must navigate tunnels so restrictive they have to push their air tanks in front of them, crawling through the silt like soldiers under barbed wire. The walls press against your chest and helmet. One wrong move stirs up a cloud of white silt, reducing visibility to 0 in seconds. In this suffocating darkness, panic is a death sentence. At the mouth of this maze sits a heavy steel grate, installed specifically to keep the untrained out. It is secured by a padlock, and the key is strictly guarded. Yet, on that August evening, Ben was not only allowed past this barrier, but he also left 2 fully pressurized tanks right at the gate. They were his lifeline, a promise of a safe return that he would never fulfill. Long before he stood on the edge of that dark spring, Ben McDaniel was a man fiercely loved by his family. He was the eldest of 3 boys, raised in a home where loyalty was everything. Friends remember him as a fearless protector with a booming laugh and a passion for extreme sports. But beneath that confidence, Ben was carrying a crushing burden. In 2008, his younger brother Paul died suddenly at just 22 years old. It was a shattering blow. In the years that followed, Ben's marriage ended, his construction business collapsed, and he found himself nearly $50,000 in debt. He was adrift, his anchor violently severed. That was why he moved to the Florida coast in 2010. He needed a sanctuary to rebuild his spirit. Just days before he vanished, Ben visited his family in Tennessee. He seemed lighter, more optimistic. He spoke about starting a new dive business and spent time with his girlfriend. Before heading back to Florida, he left a handwritten note on his parents' kitchen counter. He thanked them for their support and promised to take care of them as they grew older. He signed it with 3 simple words: "I love y'all." It was the last thing they would ever receive from him. The day after Ben descended into the cave, the Florida sun beat down on the busy Vortex Spring parking lot. 30,000 tourists were cycling through the area that season, and Thursday, August 19th, was just another chaotic day of splashing kids and sunbathing teens. Sitting right in the middle of this bustling crowd was Ben's GMC pickup truck. It was parked exactly where he had left it the night before. Inside, his wallet, his cell phone, and his beloved dog, Spooner, were waiting. The truck sat there baking in the 90-degree heat for an entire day, completely unnoticed by the dive shop staff. But here's the part that really bothers me. It wasn't until Friday morning, nearly 36 hours after Ben had slipped beneath the water's surface, that an employee finally realized the truck hadn't moved. The realization struck with a sickening jolt. The dive shop employees quickly checked the dive logs and saw that Ben hadn't signed out. They rushed to the water's edge, scanning the clear basin for any sign of bubbles or the flash of a wetsuit. There was nothing. The sheriff's department was immediately called, and the initial search began. When the first rescue diver went down to the cave entrance, he found the heavy steel grate still securely locked. But sitting right outside the bars, perfectly placed in the silt, were the 2 backup air tanks Ben had rented. They were completely untouched and full of air. Whatever had happened to Ben, he never made it back to his lifeline. The news of Ben's disappearance hit his parents in Memphis like a physical blow. They immediately packed their bags and drove straight to Florida, setting up a desperate command center at the edge of the spring. The local police brought in specialized cave recovery divers, the elite of the elite, men who were accustomed to retrieving bodies from the most unforgiving underwater environments on Earth. These divers assumed this would be a tragic but routine recovery. A reckless, uncertified diver had gone too deep, panicked, and drowned. It happens every year. But as the divers squeezed through the locked grate and began mapping the suffocatingly tight limestone veins of the cave, a profound sense of unease began to spread among them. Vortex Spring is not a sprawling, endless labyrinth. It is essentially a single, jagged tube that gradually narrows until it becomes impassable for a human being. It is a dead end. The recovery teams scoured every inch of that tube. They pushed themselves into crevices so tight they had to physically chip away at the rock to back out. They found no body. They found no dive gear, no fins, no helmet, and no shreds of neoprene. Nothing. But what they did notice about the dive shop employees' accounts started raising incredibly alarming red flags. The employees who had unlocked the gate for Ben, Eduardo Terran, and Chuck Cronin admitted they had seen him go in, but then they just went home for coffee. To grasp why the dive shop's actions were so baffling, you have to look at the dark history of Vortex Spring itself. This wasn't just a random hole in the ground. It was a site with a notorious reputation. In the 1990s, the cave system claimed the lives of no fewer than 13 divers. These were people who underestimated the disorienting, silty darkness, and suffocated in the freezing water. The death toll became such a massive liability that the state threatened to shut the spring down completely. In response, the owners installed the heavy rebar grate at the 300-foot mark, effectively sealing off the most dangerous sections of the cave to anyone without explicit cave diving certification and the key. The rule was absolute. No key, no entry. The gate was the only thing standing between amateur divers and a terrifying death. So why, on a quiet Wednesday evening, did a dive shop employee willingly violate this sacred safety protocol? Eduardo Terran knew Ben. He knew Ben was a regular, but he also knew with absolute certainty that Ben was not certified to pass that gate. Yet Terran unlocked it anyway, watched Ben swim into the abyss, locked the gate back up, and walked away. The sheer negligence of leaving a diver alone in a notoriously lethal, locked cave system at sunset defied all logic and standard diving practices. As days turned into a grueling, agonizing week, Ben's parents, Shelby and Patty, refused to leave the water's edge. Their desperation grew so intense that they offered a staggering $30,000 reward to anyone who could bring their son's body out of that cave. This massive bounty attracted thrill seekers and amateur divers from across the country, turning the tragedy into a macabre circus. The expert recovery divers were horrified. They knew the reward would tempt unqualified people into the deadly cave, potentially causing even more fatalities. The lead recovery diver begged the family to rescind the money, presenting a brutal moral dilemma. Do you keep the reward to find your son, knowing it might lure another mother's child to their watery death? I'm genuinely curious. If you were in their shoes, would you have kept the reward active? Let me know in the comments. The parents, blinded by grief, refused to back down. They were convinced their boy was down there, trapped in the dark. But the expert divers had reached their absolute limit. They had scoured every microscopic inch of the cave system, risking their own lives in spaces so tight they couldn't even turn their heads. The conclusion was unanimous. Ben McDaniel was not in the cave. If you are captivated by deep water mysteries, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next defies every law of logic. Let's stop and look at the facts together, because this is where the official narrative completely falls apart. The cave is a dead end. Over a dozen of the world's most elite cave divers searched it for 36 days. They found zero physical evidence of a human body, not a single trace. Now, water does strange things to the human body, and aquatic scavengers can certainly speed up decomposition, but they cannot eat a heavy neoprene wetsuit. They cannot eat an aluminum air tank, a fiberglass helmet, or rubber fins. If Ben had drowned in that cave, his gear would absolutely still be there. Period. So, if he isn't in the cave, where is he? The police began to look closer at the dive shop and the events surrounding that final evening. The timeline was incredibly tight. Ben was last seen at 7:30 in the evening. His truck was left untouched and his dog abandoned inside. Ben had just spent a week making plans for the future, promising his parents he would care for them. Those are not the actions of a man planning to vanish. Yet, the police brought in cadaver dogs, highly trained to detect the scent of human remains even through water. The dogs scoured the banks of the spring, the surrounding woods, and the parking lot. They hit on one specific area, the water directly around the dock and the back of an employee's truck. The cadaver dog's reaction sent a shockwave through the investigation. They didn't hit on the deep water near the cave entrance. They alerted on the shallow water right by the wooden dock where Ben had first entered. Even more disturbing, another dog alerted on the scent of death near the dive shop itself. Suddenly, The impossible locked room mystery beneath the surface began to look like a massive, clumsy misdirection. Think about the backup air tanks sitting perfectly upright outside the locked grate. To an experienced diver, leaving your lifeline outside a locked gate you are about to pass through is utterly nonsensical. It's the equivalent of a skydiver leaving their reserve parachute on the airplane. But to someone who doesn't understand cave diving, someone trying to stage a scene to look like a drowning, those tanks are the perfect prop. They scream, "A diver went in here and never came back out." The police began to suspect that Ben never made it into the cave at all. They theorized that something violent happened on the surface, perhaps an altercation on the dock in the darkening hours of the evening. The locked grate, the untouched tanks, the abandoned truck. What if it was all a frantic cover-up designed to point investigators toward the one place no one could easily verify? The one place so dangerous, people would just accept that the cave had swallowed him whole. Let's step back and look at that humid Wednesday evening through a different lens. The possibility of a staged disappearance. Ben was sitting on the bank that afternoon, scribbling in his dive log, perhaps contemplating a life he no longer wanted. He was carrying a crushing weight of nearly $50,000 in tax debt and the lingering grief of his brother Paul's death 2 years earlier. Eduardo Terran claimed he unlocked the gate for Ben at 7:30, but we have to ask, what if the timeline was a complete fabrication? Some investigators began to suspect that Ben McDaniel used his knowledge of the spring's deadly reputation to orchestrate an escape. He had just visited his parents and left a note thanking them for his sabbatical, ending with a simple, "I love y'all." To some, it sounded like a final goodbye. Did he leave his truck and his gear as props, slipping away into the Florida night to start over? It is a theory that offers hope, but it crashes against one heartbreaking reality. Spooner. Ben loved that rescue dog more than anything. The idea that he would leave his best friend to suffer in a sweltering truck in 90-degree heat simply doesn't fit the man his family knew. The atmosphere around Vortex Spring turned toxic as the search dragged on. The McDaniel family poured their resources into private investigations, scouring the Florida swamps while publicly accusing the dive shop staff of foul play. The shop owner denied everything, while the local sheriff's department struggled to manage a media circus without any physical evidence of a crime. Then, a chilling report surfaced that seemed to support the idea of an escape. A local man claimed he saw someone matching Ben's description walking along the highway late on the night of August 18th. The man was soaking wet, carrying a duffel bag, and appeared to be looking over his shoulder. It was the kind of lead that could change everything. Authorities scrambled to verify the sighting, checking gas station cameras and questioning residents. But the wet man on the highway had vanished as completely as the diver in the cave. Whether it was a genuine sighting or just another ghost in a case full of them, it added a layer of confusion to an already impossible mystery. This is where the pieces of the puzzle finally collide, and the true horror of what happened at Vortex Spring is laid bare. Think about the facts we have gathered. The backup tanks were left outside the gate. The cadaver dogs hid on the shallow water and an employee's truck. And then there is the physical reality. A 6'2" man weighing over 200 pounds simply cannot evaporate inside a narrow limestone tube. The world-class divers who risked their lives were right. Ben McDaniel was never in that cave. But the evidence suggests he didn't run away either. You don't write a heartfelt letter to your parents, promising to care for them in their old age, and then abandon them. The devastating truth is that Ben likely died on the surface that very evening. Whether it was a sudden accident or a violent confrontation, The evidence points toward a staged scene. The unlocked gate and the perfectly placed tanks were a frantic illusion, a way to use the spring's terrifying reputation as a weapon. They knew the cave was so dangerous that eventually the authorities would have to stop looking. They turned a natural wonder into an impenetrable alibi. The psychological weight of this realization is almost too much to process. For over a month, Shelby and Patty McDaniel sat by the water, tortured by the thought of their son suffocating in the dark. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and inadvertently put dozens of rescue divers in harm's way, all to recover a body from a tomb that was empty from the start. If this was a cover-up, then the people responsible didn't just take a life. They weaponized a family's grief against them. They watched a mother and father endure 36 days of psychological torture, knowing the boy they were weeping for was never coming out of that water. It is a level of cruelty that is hard to fathom. The cave itself became an unwitting accomplice, its reputation for death serving as the ultimate distraction. Every time a diver squeezed through that grate, the perpetrators could rest easy, knowing the silt and the limestone would keep their secret. The true horror of Vortex Spring isn't just the danger of the abyss. It's that it provided the perfect stage for a man to disappear into thin air while the world looked in the wrong direction. In the years following that long, suffocating summer, the case of Ben McDaniel slowly went cold. The dive shop owner faced years of suspicion, but was never charged with a crime. He died a few years later in an unrelated incident, taking whatever secrets he held to the grave. Eduardo Terran, the last man to see Ben alive, maintained his story and eventually faded from the public eye. Ben's parents, broken by the loss of a second son, eventually returned to Memphis without the closure they so desperately sought. They never got a body to bury or a grave to visit. Today, the rebar gate at the bottom of the spring remains locked, guarding an empty, silent chamber. The $30,000 reward still stands, a lingering ghost of a promise in the Florida air. If you want to dive deeper into cases that challenge the official narrative and explore the darker corners of the human experience, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We uncover stories like this every week, looking past the surface to find the truth hidden in the depths. Humans are naturally afraid of the dark and the crushing weight of the deep. The story of Ben McDaniel preys on those primal fears. But the ultimate tragedy of Vortex Spring teaches us something far more disturbing. The most dangerous monsters don't live in the lightless depths of an underwater cave. They walk among us in the sunlight. A limestone cavern can only take a life if a mistake is made. But it takes a human being to look a grieving family in the eye and say nothing while they tear themselves apart. Ben McDaniel may have vanished into the night, but his memory remains trapped in the silence of those who know exactly what happened on the dock that August evening.